Hey, thanks for joining me today for episode 66 of Podcasting Your Brand. I'm your host, producer Jaime, providing learning lessons for you to podcast your brand. And today we're going to be talking about a Podcasting 102 topic, getting your listeners to listen all the way through. And this episode is brought to you by my own brand, Flintstone Media. So listen in and let's do this first by starting with one of my daily tips. Hey, it's producer Jaime here today with your quick tip, and it is critically important to the success of your show. And what is this tip for you today? It's a concept that you need to drill into your head with a fierceness, okay? And it is that your show and all the things that surround your show are all about your listeners. There are three people in the room whenever there's an episode. There's you, your guest, and then there's your listener. And the most important person is the one who's not there. It's your listener. So in all things that you do, in the topics that you cover, the guests that you have on, the frequency of release, how long your episodes are, what day you release them, the sponsors and partners that you get involved, literally all the things about your show, ask yourself this critical question. How did it serve and how does it bring value to my listeners? You ask that to yourself with every episode and you're going to have success. So come back here every day, podcastingyourbrand.com for more free tips. I'm producer Jaime. So be sure to subscribe to me on Instagram or TikTok. On Instagram, I'm at Flintstone Media. On TikTok, I'm at producer Jaime. That way you can get all the tips and you get them first. And you're also going to be the first to hear about this new offering that I have. I'm so excited. So you're listening to this show because I want you to have the best podcast that you can possibly have. So now I have offering for you a live workshop where you can work with me to maximize your podcast potential. It's a live workshop. The next one is happening March 31st at 10 a.m. And you can join me then. It's just $99. It's going to take your podcast to the next level. So toppodcastworkshop.com for that information and to sign up and join me March 31st at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Now let's get on to today's lesson. All right. So yesterday's daily tip, if you already subscribed to me on TikTok and Instagram, then you caught it, because yesterday's daily tip was all about checking the stats so you can see how long people are listening through your episode. What is the average consumer duration time for your show? Now, a lot of podcast players don't tell you that, can't tell you that, but there are three places you can look for that information. You can look in iTunes, you can look in Spotify, and if you have your show on YouTube, you can also check YouTube. Those three platforms do provide that statistic. So go into the statistics suite on those platforms and dig until you can find the statistic on the average consumer time for each episode. That's what you want to look at. And look at that now. And then listen to the rest of this episode and then start implementing some of these ideas and these tricks. And then take a look at that number again another month and then another month from there and see if there's any change. So right now we're going to talk about 4 tricks that are really going to help you hook your listeners and get them to listen through to the end, because I want you to think about this like fishing. You know, if you ever go fishing, which I never do, but if you ever go fishing, then you put the bait on the line, you throw the line out there and you try to hook a fish so you can reel them in. So you want to be thinking about your listeners kind of the same way. How can you hook them in and reel them in? And that hook happens at the very top of your show. And you want to get to it super, super fast. You want to give them something to sink their teeth into and get them interested and make them want more. So, okay, here are 4 things. Number 1, and as I go along, by the way, I'm going to be giving my caveats to each one as well, because there are some. So number 1, an on today's show. So the first time I ever heard that phrase, on today's show, was working on Horses in the Morning back, I think in 2017, maybe something like that. But I was in charge of putting together the On Today's Show segment that happened to the front of the show. And essentially what it does is it sets the table, sets the stage for your audience or your listener to know what's coming on today's show. So you can say, on today's show, I have so-and-so talking about this and such. And then I'm going to be giving a tip on da-da-da. And then we're going to be talking about da-da-da. So just giving them the rundown of what's coming, like a preview, right? Consider it like a movie trailer, okay? On today's show. Now, here's the thing. Here's the caveat. You don't want it to be too long. I've heard a couple of podcasts every once in a while where I'm listening to the intro and it's going on and on and on. And I'm like, did I just click play to hear a speech about an episode? Because that's what it feels like, when is it going to get to the good stuff? So the caveat is to not make that too long. Like literally just bullet point your audience through your show's rundown really, really quick, like just a few seconds, couple sentences, and you are done. So that's trick number one. Trick number two to hook your audience in right at the beginning is to tease a cool moment in the show. Like, for example, let's say you're doing an interview show and you know that there's a cool moment coming up. This is something you record, obviously. You've recorded your interview already, so you're going back recording an intro for your episode. To remember a cool moment in your interview, a moving moment, a stirring moment, right? A very interesting, educational, insightful moment, right? Tease that at the beginning. Say, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe when my guest said this, or what my guest thought about that, or when I figured this out, or my aha moment when blah, 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 right? Think about a cool moment that happens, that's going to happen later in the episode, and then tease it. Don't really say what it is, but enough that it gets them interested, right? Now, the other way to do it, so that's one way to do it, is to talk about it. Another way to do it as with the tease at the front is to actually share a clip. So you can actually take that cool moment and then you can trim it down to just a tiny little bite-sized morsel, an amuse-bouche in chef terms, so to speak, right? Just a tiny little bite-sized little taste, okay? Just to whet their palate. But here's the thing, the caveat, again, you don't want this tease at the beginning of the show to be too long. Okay. I think that the sweet spot is about 7 to 10 seconds. I think the max is like 10 to 15 seconds. You really don't want to go too much longer than that, because what happens is sometimes the audience can get confused. They're like, wait a minute, did I come into the middle of the episode? So you want to have that confusion go away really quickly by answering their question really quickly by actually getting into the beginning of the episode, especially if they're a new listener who's just discovering their show. So minimize the confusion. Make sure the teaser clip at the front is very, very short. Okay. Trick number three. Trick number three to hook your audience. You can pose a question to your listener. So and it has to be topical. So again, this is something that you're recording after you've already recorded your interview or your solo episode, whatever it is. Something that's come up, right, that you feel like you've really answered, then ask that question at the beginning of your episode. Say, have you ever found yourself wondering why, blah, blah, blah? Or was there ever a time when you wish you knew ... right? And then you ask that question to your listener in the beginning and then say, well, you are going to find out that answer today, or today is the day that you're going to learn the process for doing thus and such, right? So then at the end so now they know they want to listen to the whole thing. Okay. Or another way that you can do it, another way you can kind of bump it up a little bit, is while you're teasing that with the question, then you can say, the interview is going to answer so much of that. And then afterwards, I'm going to wrap it up with a couple extra calls to action, couple extra things that you can do today to get you closer to being on that right path. So what I just did there was not only did I tease that the episode itself was going to cover all this stuff, but that there was also going to be this little extra bit at the end. I'm going to flesh that out in a second here. But the reason that this can be so good is because it gets people listening to the whole thing. But here's the caveat. And I'll raise my hand and I'll say, I've accidentally done this a time or two. You pose a question and then you forget to answer it. So make sure, the best way to avoid that is to record you asking the question after you've recorded the interview and everything. Make sure that answer actually does present itself. Don't just conjecturize. I think that's the word, whatever. Don't just think that maybe it will be answered. No. Make sure it actually is a question that actually gets answered. Here's why. Actually, no, I'll save the why in a second. I'll close with the why. It's actually really, really important. Okay. Hook number 4, the trick that you can do, last one, and I kind of alluded to it a moment ago, is that you can create an ending segment that is kind of like a caboose, like an anchor for your episode, something that gets people to listen all the way through, an extra value add. There's so many pros to this, because for you, It's extra value added for a listener on a particular, maybe narrow scope of your topic. It can also be a really great opportunity for you to position yourself as a thought leader in this space by adding your 2 cents in, your extra 2 cents in as extra layer at the end, right? It can also provide opportunities for extra partnerships, because if you recall from one of my daily tips, if you're paying attention, it's all about setting the table of opportunity. So by having one of those extra segments available at the end, you never know what opportunities can come for a partner to join in on that and those kinds of things. So there's so many different pros to having a segment at the end. And of course, one of those is it's additional hook to get people to listen all the way through. Now, here's the caveat, because I've always got one. And the caveat is make sure that it's actually something your audience wants. Okay. You might imagine what that extra segment could be. I think I shared in another example that, for example, if you have a parenting episode, then perhaps that back segment can be on family finance, right? But you have to know your audience, make sure that it's something that they want. So engaging with your audience on social, listening to their feedback, but also to what I said at the top, keeping an eye on those consumer duration stats in iTunes, in Spotify, and in YouTube as you start to roll these ideas out. See the patterns, see the trends and how they're affecting what people are consuming. If there is a really sharp drop off at like 90%, then you know that back 10%, if that's an extra segment, it's not really working for you. Or let's say it's a closing part of your show that's just goes on and on and on. You have way too many calls to action, whatever it is. Pay attention to that, and you can know if what your efforts you're making are working for you or if they're not working for you. Okay. So here's the thing. This is me taking it back to the front. Remember that it is about hooking your audience in the beginning, kind of like a fish, right? So you do need that bait. But just like I was mentioning, where if you ask a question at the top, make sure that it's answered at the back, right? That actually isn't a concept that goes for any way that you're creating a hook at the front, any way that you're creating a tease at the front. You need the bait. Okay. You need the bait, but make sure it's not a bait and switch. Okay. You have to fulfill the promise of the tease. If you don't, okay, I'll give you an example. Have you ever seen a trailer for a movie and there's a part in that trailer like, oh my gosh, that's what got your butt in the chair. That's what made you buy the ticket, right? And then you go see the movie and you're like, well, wait a minute. What, that one part, but where was it? You're leaving the theater so disappointed, right? You're not going to trust that filmmaker or whatever to go back to make that promise or honor that promise with the next trailer or movie they put out. Same thing. If you don't fulfill the promise made by the tease at the top of the episode, then you're going to lose that listener. So you have to, if I'm going to make a blanket caveat over all of this, you absolutely have to close the sale by delivering on that tease. And if you do, then guess what? Next time someone checks into your episode and they hear the tease at the top of that next episode, they know that listening to that next episode is going to be fulfilling and satisfying because they're going to get their answer because they now trust you. So there you go. There's your lesson for the day. 4 ways to create a hook to get your listeners to listen all the way through. Now let's get to one more of my daily tips. Again, be sure to subscribe to me on Instagram and on TikTok for all of them so you get them first. And if you have any questions or if there's any topic that you want me to zero in on, whether on a daily tip or on a full episode, please email me, jaime@flintstonemedia.com. Is producer Jaime signing off for now. And remember, the only thing more powerful than your voice is your spirit to use it. So turn that mic on. Now, let's end with our last daily tip. Hey, it's producer Jaime with your daily tip on podcasting. Today, I want to talk to you about ways that you can create really great interview moments with your guests. And it all starts with the research that you do. So while you're doing your research, you want to look for 3 things. Number 1, look for points of commonality between you and your guests. It could be anything, something, your favorite food, your favorite movie, your favorite hobby, where you grew up, where you went to school, whatever, political affiliation, whatever it is, something that's a point of commonality. Number 2, a point of difference, where where do you differ? Where is there a stark contrast between yourself and your guests? Again, it could be something about your background. It can be something opinion related, whatever it is. Look for a point of difference. And number 3, look for a point of uniqueness in your guests themselves. So what is something that is so unbelievably unique that you can't capture in any other interview with any other person? What is that? And try to find that. And you're going to find those few things, right? And you're going to take note of them while you're doing your research, then pin them off to the side. And then while you're doing your conversation, yes, right, not an interview, your conversation with your guest, just let them come up organically. I hope that helps you have some great interview moments with your guests. Come back here every day, podcastingyourbrand.com for more tips. I'm producer Jaime.